projected down 37%, gross margin projected at 39%, no guide beyond Q1. How much of this do you attribute to the macro? How much of it is your own execution?
Hey, John, and thanks for having me on the show. Obviously, appreciate the opportunity to be on the show when the numbers are good, but hey, we'll be here and talking about the environment when the numbers aren't good as well. So thank you, John, Carl, Deidre, for having me today. Clearly the Q4, we eked out at the low end of guide, but the Q1 numbers were well below our expectations. The big factor in Q1 is the market shift, and what we've seen is customers carried a fair amount of inventory in Q3 and Q4 for the back to school and the holiday refresh. Obviously, as they come into the new year and the macro situation for their business, major inventory adjustments. We're selling into our customers well below their sell-out rates in their businesses. So it'll be the biggest single quarter of inventory correction that we see in the marketplace, literally in our history, that we can look back as we see records. So major inventory adjustments as they look into a much weaker market than was forecast. And we see that globally, but also particularly with China and the issues that they've been working through with their market and COVID there. So overall, we've given a very transparent look and also working with our customers to bring their inventories down in the first quarter of the year. And with that, we do expect that there'll be some strengthening as we go possibly into the second half of the year. But as you said, we view the Q1 guide being transparent and one that we're working with our customers. Now, clearly, we had good position for some of our new products, Sapphire Rapids. Obviously, the client ramp of our Alder Lake and Raptor Lake products has been strong. So we do feel the products are in a position, and we did gain share in the PC marketplace last year. So good news inside of that, but still a very tough outlook.
So you saw an inventory situation coming, but not the severity of this demand slowdown. I think 6 months ago, I asked you about exactly this Q4 scenario of an extreme weakening in demand. So now, are you prepared for demand not to rebound all year, even weaken further, either in PCs or in data center? Because in data center, even with the hyperscalers, you are starting to see some weakening, right?
Yeah, and generally, we see that weakening through the first half of the year. We see some modest recovery in the second half of the year. We've clearly adjusted our cost basis and making those adjustments. However, we run factories, and if the factory's full, it costs X. If the factory's empty, it costs most of X. So, in a fixed cost business, that becomes acutely painful on the margins, as you've seen. That said, we do have strengthening of the product lines. We do expect some improvement in the market conditions, and obviously as we ramp our new products into the new factories, that will improve the situation in the second half of the year with more competitive products as well. But overall, we still see the outlook as being pretty challenging in the first half of the year.
So Pat, that leads me to, given that nobody knows what the second half is going to look like, what operational and financial levers are you prepared to pull? It seems you can further delay capital projects, perhaps. You can cut the dividend to preserve cash, though I know you don't want to do that. You can lay off workers, but layoffs don't actually save you much cash in the near term. Are you prepared to do any or all of those things, or something else I'm missing?
Well, this is why we announced our cost and austerity programs in the last quarter earning, and we said $3 billion this year. Dave and I, my CFO, we are committed to meeting or exceeding that level as we go through cost programs. Some of those are people. A lot of that is product cost steps that we're taking in our factories. At the same time, we're fundamentally investing in the future of the company, and this is where we need to make those long-term capital investments. And as I like to say, 3-quarter economic cycles cannot dictate 5-year capital cycle investments for strategic leadership. So we have to continue some level of those investments if we're going to get back to leadership, and we're deeply committed, to doing that. So adjusting the near-term cost, I call it capacity for capital as well as strategic capital, and keeping on path with the strategic capital even as we make adjustments in the near term. So also our smart capital programs, John, U.S. chips, EU chips, our SCIP, our semiconductor co-investment programs, ITC, all of these give us leverage on our capital so that we can minimize the pressure on the balance sheet in the near term. So we continue to navigate through being able to do near-term adjustments, long-term investments.
So about those potential adjustments, I know your strategy is interlocking. You need the capital spending to regain manufacturing leadership. You need manufacturing leadership to stand up a foundry business. You need the foundry business to load your fabs enough to have margin on your own chips and designs. But does this economic maelstrom that the PC business is going through mean that you can or should delay some of that capital outlay because your revenue is getting delayed?
Well, we're looking at it very carefully, John, and I say this is never, an A-B. We're always looking, can we delay the capital a little bit and still stay on track? Can we lower the requirements? Can we get a little bit more efficient? And clearly, if, we laid out a capital intensity as a percentage of revenue last year, net capital, and we were able to stay inside of those guardrails, we expect that we'll be able to do that again this year, right, as we work hard to get these capital offsets in place that give us more room on the gross capital line, even as we make net capital adjustments. So we believe we're going to be able to navigate through those. We're taking aggressive steps and also finding other ways to present value to our shareholders. Things like the Mobileye IPO that we very successfully did late last year was other ways that we could improve the balance sheet and present value to our shareholders.
Pat, good morning. It's Deirdre. I appreciate you coming on, especially after a tough quarter and tough commentary. You do sound more humble, more realistic, which I think some investors may see as a relief and maybe part of that bottoming process. I got to press you on the dividend because I know a lot of folks want to know about this. It looks like you did clear the deck in a way with your guidance last night. Why didn't you just say that you might need to cut the dividend instead of changing the language around it?
Well, we're always going to look at the capital allocation priorities of the company. We should be a dividend payer, and as Dave said on the call last night, we're committed to the dividend and to a very competitive dividend position. But amongst all of the capital requirements, we look at that very carefully over time, and per the last conversation, strategic capital offsets, near-term adjustments, as well as the continuing healthy dividend that we present to our shareholders.
Right. I guess, what does that healthy dividend mean? Pat, you mentioned earlier that you wanted to be transparent. So are the folks that took that wording, competitive dividend, you just said that again, are they wrong to interpret that as a potential cut?
Well, we just reaffirmed our dividend payment for this last quarter, and we did that on the earnings call yesterday. Obviously, important topic that we'll continue discussing in the leadership team and with the board of directors. But we do believe this competitive, healthy dividend, something a company of our size and scale should be presenting to our shareholders.
Okay, let's move on. Some might argue, though, that your tech transition plan is still too ambitious. They point to your plan to make 5 tech transitions, 5 nodes in 4 years. That's twice as fast as anything done in history. Given Intel's history of mixed execution, what makes you confident that you can achieve that?
Well, we're seeing the data every day, and our customers are reaffirming it. When I said 5 nodes in 4 years, Intel 7 was the first one. That's now fully ramped. Intel 4 will be ramping that this year with our Meteor Lake product. Intel 3, our server products, and as I indicated on the call yesterday, looking very healthy for the 24 server products. And then the process technology that gets us back to leadership, we call Intel 20A and Intel 18A. We're hitting key milestones, and this quarter we presented the design guidelines to our leading edge foundry customers for that. So we're measuring these all the time, presenting that data to our customers and to our own product teams, Deidre. I'll say we're on track for 5 nodes in 4 years. Yeah, it's never been done before, but we're committed to get back to leadership. We're making the investments to accomplish that. And as I like to say, let the silicon speak. And our test silicon that's coming out of wafer is speaking clearly that we're on track to accomplish that very aggressive strategy that we've laid out.
Hey, Pat, do government officials have a right to be critical in the wake of some of the subsidies the company's received for some of the expansions? And do you think it affects your ability to qualify for anything that might be in the pipeline down the road?
Well, remember, we've laid out this path with the EU CHIPS Act and the US CHIPS Act. And, I'll just remind you, Carl, that, no government should be acting on 3-quarter economic cycles on decade-long investment strategies. And that's the basis of the US CHIPS Act. Also, Commerce has yet to present the rulemaking for that, so we've seen zero from any of those efforts so far. And as we said, hey, we believe this is the right thing because, today when we have, surplus, right, it isn't that long ago, Carl, where we were screaming for shortages as we had so many industries that weren't able to get enough chips. We have to build this most, critical technology, for the foundation of every aspect of human existence as it goes more digital. So we believe that strategy is still a sound one. And as Commerce presents their rulemaking shortly, we believe we'll be applying for grants against that for the long-term commitments that we are making, the long-term factory, and we're making good progress in Arizona and Ohio as two big projects. And I regularly update photos to the White House and the administration of the progress that we're making to have that capacity in place.
Pat, I want to get back to products. Emerald Rapids should be coming end of year. Should be a relatively easy transition from Sapphire, but at the same time, there's this data center slowdown. So how much visibility do you have into the second half of hyperscaler and enterprise demand? I know some of those buy for the long term, but they might have some excess capacity of what they've bought already.
Yeah, and I think it's a great point, John, because we definitely saw data center slow down as we went through the year. We're still year-on-year growth, but it definitely slowed down. We do expect that there will be inventory burn in the data center portion of the business in the first half of the year, and that's reflected in our Q1 guide. Now, that slowdown was enterprise, it was China, but it also has now started to affect the cloud vendors. Working closely with them, we do expect some level of recovery in the second half of the year, so we do expect year-on-year growth in the data center business, but much more modest for exactly what you described. One of the big factors there, we have a larger exposure to the China market. When will they come back? We do believe that'll be the case. And hearing their words at the World Economic Forum and what they're going to do for economic stimulation, we're a bit optimistic there. But our segments, the enterprise and China, stronger for us. We do expect that they potentially will be recovering a little bit more quickly than the cloud vendors. Obviously, with Sapphire Rapids, Emerald Rapids coming up, our product line is strengthening, and we're getting just tremendously positive response from customers about key capabilities, like AI performance, security capabilities, networking capabilities, where we're not a little bit ahead, we're a lot ahead of the competition in those areas. Key new workloads for the future, and we're clearly in a leadership position now with Sapphire and Emerald coming out later this year.
Pat, finally, a different kind of macro question. Unlike a lot of other tech companies, certainly in software, when I think of the macro impact in the Fed, I think of you guys because of some of the capital projects that you're doing, and not only the large amount of outlay that involves, but the labor that involves. As we're seeing perhaps some softening in the labor market and some coming down in inflation, are you seeing any potential benefit on those capital projects that you're spending billions to get complete?
And the general answer is not yet. Now, we are expecting that some of those things will start to affect energy prices coming down, labor, shortages, potentially benefiting those projects a bit. But generally, we saw a huge increase in some of the cost gaps as we went into the second half of the year for exactly the reason. So we're optimistic that those gaps will start to collapse a bit. But at this point, we're still expecting that some of those effects are, in fact, driving our cost comparisons. And if you go back to the CHIPS Act as an example, the key question was, can we build these factories cost effectively in the US compared to what it costs in Asia? And that's the basis of the CHIPS Act, and why Commerce has been such a great partner in helping to put that forward. But as inflation has pushed up those costs, the gaps in fact increased. So we do need to see some improvements in those areas to make sure these big factory investments that we're making are competitive and allow US-based product to be competing in the global market.
Pat, any CEO can come on and talk about a good quarter. We appreciate hearing from you today. Pat Gelsinger, CEO of Intel. Let's get the street's reaction to that conversation. Our next guest pulling no punches in a new note this morning saying Intel is punching itself in the face and calling those Q4 earnings the worst he has seen from a company. Joining us now, Bernstein Managing Director and Senior Analyst Stacy Razgon. Stacy, anything new you heard in that conversation that changes your opinion about Intel either way?
No, not really. I mean, the numbers kind of spoke for themselves last night. They screamed a pretty direct message, I think, to everybody on the street. No, there wasn't anything new that I just heard.
How much risk is there for Intel in the second half if conditions deteriorate? And by deteriorate, I mean even if the PC market doesn't get much worse, but the data center market does.
So to take those leads, it's not implausible to think that the back half should be better than it better be, but it's not implausible that it could be quite a bit better. PCs right now are undergoing it's clear CPUs are undergoing a massive inventory flush in PCs. They are under shipping by a really big amount, which, by the way, you got to remember, they were over shipping by a massive amount too over the last like four to 6 quarters. So that's correcting now. At some point when that flush stops and you go from under shipping demand just to shipping to it, you can get a lift. And usually PCs are stronger, just the end market in the back half versus the front half. So the idea that can get better is not crazy. It should, it ought to. On the server side, same thing. We've got some inventory correction going on. I don't think it's nearly as bad as in PCs, but we've got some of that now. So again, you got some of that correction. I think what Pat is hoping is that the enterprise and China headwinds that they got right now start to ease. The cloud stuff, I think that is the wild card. We'll have to see what cloud happens. Usually with cloud digestions, they last a few quarters. And they do have a product cycle. Sapphire is ramping now. You should have more Sapphire as a percentage of the mix in the back half than the front half. ASPs on Sapphire should be higher, although they're offsetting cost increases, but the ASPs should be higher. So again, revenue should be up. But I mean, look, in my model, I've got data center up, well, I don't know, 35%, half over half. I've got PCs up a bunch. I've got them doing about $54 billion, something like this year. It was a big revision, let's put it that way.
Right. Stacey, it's your turn. Something that you noted, Intel made an accounting change this quarter, extending the depreciation lifetime from 5 to 8 years. That should, of course, help with those longer-term targets. But what should investors know? Is there a risk here that the company is using this kind of accounting to get there to those longer-term targets?
Well, so they're doing it because, I mean, they are using the equipment longer. Let's be honest, I mean, historically they were stuck on 14 nanometers for 8 years or whatever it was. And they're going to be building a foundry business where you will have more customers that are on nodes for longer. Although, personally, I would have liked them to build the foundry business before they extend the depreciation. But that's why they're doing it. They actually did it in 2016 as well. They went from 4 years to 5. This time they're going from 5 years to 8. For the listeners, the effect that has is it reduces the amount of fixed cost that they're taking every year on those same assets, and it makes the margins and the earnings look better. The Q1 guide, it was minus 15 cents. It was actually inflated by about 9 cents from this change. The Q1 gross margins were 39% is the guide. They were actually 36 without this change. And for the full year, this change inflates earnings by probably 60 cents and gross by 4 to 5 percentage points. It does not change cash flow. So that's it, but it will inflate earnings. And they have margin targets. They said they want to get to 51 to 53. Yeah, I mean, they'll have a 4 or 5 point tailwind to try to get to that target.
So that'll help with that. More broadly, Stacey, you were on the call last night, though I know you didn't get a question. You just heard our interview. As I remarked, very, very different tone from Mr. Gelsinger. He seems humbled. He seems a lot less optimistic. Is that something that needed to happen? Is that part of the bottoming process here?
I mean, I wish it happened, when he started the job. I mean, it's sort of unusual for somebody to come into a company which is a clear turnaround and just sound that bullish right out of the gate. I mean, it was, in hindsight, not a great thing to do. They're obviously they're cutting big costs, but I mean, headcount's up 20% since he took the job. So they were hiring to a plan that they gave a plan at the analyst day. They had him doing something like $120 billion in 5 years. They were clearly hiring to that plan. He certainly didn't get a whole lot out of sounding that bullish out of the gate. So I think the tone change is warranted and helpful. I would also say, just to pat this, you're right, this was the second quarter they didn't put me on the call. People are noticing. It's not a good look. I wish that they would put me back on the call.
Stacey, a lot of our viewers probably remember a time where companies like AMD existed at the pleasure of Intel. And I wonder, when you look back, when you think that far back, Was there a moment that was truly consequential in that flip, or has it been more of a frog in water kind of dynamic?
No, they're probably, so look, you're right. AMD at one point, I think that's a good way to put it, existed at Intel's pleasure. AMD at that point basically got whatever scraps that Intel left on the ground. But it makes AMD's turnaround like pretty remarkable. The controversy in AMD, 2015 or so was, are they going to go bankrupt or not? So, and it was a $2 stock, and we can argue about it now, but I mean, clearly it's not a $2 stock anymore. It's like a real business with real products, and they have leadership. I think the real issue that Intel has had, obviously, is the process technology delays. That was a biggie over time. I mean, that's sort of what gave AMD, the push that they need. And maybe you could argue AMD got lucky, but they capitalized on that delay. And AMD's roadmap has been rock solid. The current issues that Intel is having right now, they are the consequences of those longer term strategic issues and delays and everything. And then also the nearer term, I mean, there's been execution issues just on planning to the demand environment. They clearly just massively overestimated where things are going. So that's, I think, on the current management team. The strategic issues that they're, and the process issues, I mean, that's what Pat's trying to fix. I guess that's what he was sort of brought in to do. And if you take him at his word, they claim to have fixed the process stuff. We'll know in a few years, if they can execute on that process roadmap or not. But I think even if they can, they're never going to be back in the position that they were in. I mean, those days are gone, because even if they can get back to parity, is parity enough? I mean, AMD's a real company now, and there are other competitors out there, and ARM is building, companies building CPUs on ARM architecture, and there's lots of other things that are coming. It's never going to be the kind of market that it was, 5, 6, 7 years ago for Intel.
Well, people also used to say that about Microsoft and Windows, and while it's true, they managed to build something else. You never know with these things in tech. Stacey Raskin,
Yes, we'll see.
always good to talk to you.
You bet.
Still to come this morning, daily volume